Hi, my name is Shelley Reynolds, and I work at the University of Missouri, Kansas City Institute for Human Development. In my role at the Institute, I'm the director of the Individual Advocacy and Family Support Team, where I've worked with families, self-advocates, and professionals for the last 20 years to really identify what their issues are around problem solving and planning, and how we can better support them in those roles. What brought me to the Institute for Human Development, though, was my passion for really helping people have good lives. This came not only from my schooling, but more importantly because of the fact that I have a brother with a developmental disability who's now in his 30s. Through my day-to-day experience of growing up as a sibling, and also as I got older, serving in the role of really helping to understand supports, navigate them, and work with other people to really help Eric have the life that he wants, really serves as a foundation for much of the work that I do. One of the core principles of the LifeCourse Framework is really how is the work driven by self-advocates and families. What's key to our work is really understanding what it is that they need in their lives so we can figure out the practices and policies to best support that. Everything that you will see today is driven by those voices and those needs. So now I'm going to provide an overview of the LifeCourse Framework that we use to really guide our thinking and how we develop the tools that we use. At the core of this framework is the belief that all people have the right to live, love, work, and play, and pursue their dreams as all others in their community. What's really important about this belief is that there was a time where people with developmental disabilities didn't have access to these rights. So this framework really highlights the fact that everyone has this same right as a citizen in the United States. The other importance of that core belief is the concept of all. And I want to kind of take you to really understanding what we mean when we start talking about all. When we first set out to develop this framework, we wanted to really recognize that when we're talking about people specifically with developmental disabilities, we aren't just talking about those that receive services, but rather all people, the 4.7 million people that are estimated to have a developmental disability in the United States. As we developed the framework, though, we realized this framework was something that was much more universal that could be used for all people. It could be used for family members, it could be used for grandparents, it could be used by siblings, for lots of different reasons, not only for the reason of helping people with developmental disabilities. So I'd like to set the stage so that you understand why we needed to come up with this framework. If you look at the circles on the left and just think about your own life, you're an individual person. You have family, you have friends, you exist in the community. And if you start thinking about those with developmental disabilities and how they've received supports over the years, you start realizing that you have the person, you have services wrapped around them, sometimes special education, sometimes adult services, then you have the family, and then you have the community. And as we got focused more and more on those services, what we soon realized was that it was the person being cut off from their family and friends, which was exactly what we did not intend to do with our support system. So this framework really recognizes that and really attempts to figure out a way that how can we support people within the context of their family, their friends, and their community. So if you look at the circles on the right-hand side, you'll see the image there that we're trying to achieve. We want to help people be where they are with the families and friends around them and the community they live in, but figure out a way to integrate services and supports so they can have the good life that they're desiring. One of the reasons that we believe that integrated services and supports are so important are that there are many things that are changing. There's pressures coming from lots of different ways. We have self-advocates and families really demanding that their rights are recognized as citizens in this country. We also have the response of federal policy changing, where we're developing a federal infrastructure that really supports those rights to live in the community, have employment, have friends, and be a part of the society. But there's also other realities. We know that there's not enough money in the world for every person with a developmental disabilities to have all of the services that they desire. So we need to think differently. We need to figure out a way to develop an infrastructure so that everyone can have a good life, but utilizing lots of types of supports. What we also know is there's a lot of changing demographics. We know that baby boomers are getting older. They are going to require supports and services, and they're going to have a demand for them differently as well. We also know that the pool of people providing these supports is getting smaller and smaller, which is really causing us to have a crisis in terms of the day-to-day supports and how they're provided to people. All of these things combined together really cause us to need to think differently about how services and supports are offered in our country. So we keep talking about this phrase, integrated services and supports, but what does that really mean? Well, we utilize the star, or if you can think about it, the 5 points of a star, to really think about how we can have the good life that we want. If you think about it, the first part of the star is really thinking about what personal strengths and assets are you bringing to the table? What skills and ability, what interests do you have? What resources do you have? But we also need to really be paying attention to how are we using technology? Many of you use technology for day-to-day things. How are we using technology to get through the day? Or even maybe to provide some form of long-term supports? How are we using technology for adaptive equipment to help us do the day-to-day activities? We also know there's people in our lives. We call that relationship-based supports. Who's available? Who's a part of your life? Who really helps you get by day to day? We also know the community. We have community-based supports. These are places that anybody goes to. You can use the bus, you can go to the YMCA, you can go to your faith-based organization, you can go to the movie theater. All of those types of places really create to the supports to having a good life. But what we most commonly think about when we're thinking about people with developmental disabilities is the last one, and that's the formal eligibility-based service system. We often go straight there before we start thinking about the other types of supports. And if you go back to our statistics of really thinking about people with developmental disabilities, we know only 1 in 4 people may have access to long-term services. So that requires us to think very, very differently. So if only 1 in 4 are going to access that, we still have other people that we have to strategize with to really think about how to create a good life. The other thing that's really important to think about is where people live. You know, if I go out and I talk to people out on the street and I start saying, well, where do people with developmental disabilities live? Oftentimes a citizen would say to me, I don't know, a group home, or doesn't the government take care of them? But the reality is that over 89% of people with developmental disabilities live at home with their families, live in their own home, are somehow connected to their families. Most people with developmental disabilities don't move out into some form of eligibility-based living. As our field continues to evolve and really focus on providing person-centered supports, we really need to think about what that means. Providing person-centered supports doesn't mean ignoring the family or ignoring what we would call the context of that family. If you think about your own life, your family's had a big impact on you, whether you talk to your family currently or not. Your hobbies, your likes, your dislikes, your history, the people you know, all really comes from your family and how you grew up. But you also think about it, your expectations, your aspirations are impacted by your family. Your family also brings to it a certain sense of culture, a certain sense of membership, a certain sense of like where and how you see the world. So to truly provide person-centered supports, whether you're doing that in long-term services, whether you're doing that in the educational settings with IEPs or individualized education plans, we really need to be thinking about the person in the context of their family. When we're thinking about family, for some people that actually might mean the members of the family. Who's actually at the table, helping provide day-to-day supports, helping to think through those day-to-day supports, or really, who's there just to love and care for a person? When we think about the family, what we're trying to understand is sort of the reciprocal roles they have to each other. Family members love and care about each other. They know their history. They have a long-term commitment to them, as well as providing that day-to-day support. And if you think about it, as a family member, my mom provided a lot of support to me when I was a baby and as I was growing older. And as I was getting older, we sort of reciprocated, or we did it for each other. Sometimes I emotionally supported her. Sometimes she financially supported me. And so that's what we mean by reciprocal role. And even if you look into aging, you know, oftentimes family members are providing supports to their moms and dads and their grandparents. So this reciprocal role of being in each other's lives is so very, very important. So at the core of our framework is really understanding not only the person's desires, but how that really fits into both the family member's desires and that whole family unit and what that really looks like. So now that we know who we're talking about, we're not only talking about the person, maybe with a disability, but also the family members. We really need to understand what are the 3 things that they need. And we talk about these in terms of buckets. We know that people need information. They need the skills and they need an awareness about what's possible. They need to understand the services and supports and how they can help people get to their desired outcome. But we also know that people need peer support. They need to be connected to one another. They need that emotional support to really get out of bed each day. So sometimes that might mean having someone to call on the phone. Sometimes that might mean a support group. Sometimes that might mean going to a place that totally included you and made you feel a part of their community. We have to really pay attention to that second bucket of support. What our field typically thinks about when they're thinking about supporting the person or their family, though, is the 3rd bucket. And that 3rd bucket is goods and services. The goods and services are the day-to-day things you need to get by. So it could be financial support. It could be the day-to-day caregiving or the support needs that you might have. It might be the accommodations. It could even be support for the caregiver to have health and wellness to ensure that they can take care of themselves so they can take care of their family. So when we're thinking about our key principles, these 3 support buckets are something that we believe all people need. So many of the things that I've already talked to you about are probably things that maybe you knew about or you have access to. But one of the new things that the LifeCourse Framework brings to the conversation is really talking about this concept called the trajectory. And the reason we think it's so important is that a lot of times in the disability field, we start thinking about services not proactively, but rather they're very crisis-driven. They're when something's wrong or something needs to change, and then we start looking for services and supports. What the trajectory is really designed to do is to really help us start thinking proactively. How can we help people start thinking about where they're at right now, but also where do they want to go in the future? What is their vision? What is it that they're seeking and that they need right now that's going to help them achieve what's ahead of them as they get older? But what we also know is this concept of really helping people be able to articulate what don't they want. So if you start thinking about it, many people know what they don't want. Maybe they're a little unclear of what they do want, but they can definitely tell you what it is that they don't want. I ask that question to parents all the time, and they say things like, I don't want my child to be lonely. I don't want them to be abused. I don't want them to be harmed. I don't want them to be dependent on people. We know by thinking about what they don't want and thinking about their trajectory, we can begin problem solving and developing the supports that are important to them. Now, when we start thinking about the trajectory, the other thing that we really want to start highlighting is this concept of thinking about life experiences. We have a tendency to really only want to think about services and supports and what's available, as opposed to really thinking about it, what are the life experiences that are going to get me to where I want to go in life? So let's look at an example. Let's think about employment. Having an internship or going to college or maybe using Voc Rehab are all really, really important steps to getting a job or leading to a career. But we also need to be thinking about what happens when you're younger. Having chores, setting expectations, learning about money, learning about social skills. Those are all really, really important life experiences that are also going to benefit and lead to you getting a job. Without those life experiences, the formal service systems by themselves cannot create the outcomes that we desire. The other key principle of the LifeCourse Framework is really thinking across life domains. The developmental disability field historically has only focused on health and safety. And although those are important domains, what we want to do with this framework is to really broaden people's understanding about what's important to the good life. And what we know is that you have to be thinking about, what do I do during the day? How is my health and wellness? Where do I live? How do I stay safe? How do I have friends? And how am I involved socially? So what we've done here is we've really created icons and domains so that we can really hone in on those specific areas, but also talk about how they're all interconnected to one another. So now I'm going to briefly summarize everything we've talked about today. First, we think about the person. We think about their personal strengths and their assets, their resources, their skills, their interests. But we also need to think about that person and how they relate to their family, and thinking about the context of the family's desires, the individual member's desires. So then when we think about the next ring, what we do here is think about the quality of life of both the person and every member of that family, thinking about each one of their life domains separately, but also integrated. So when we start thinking about all of the individual family members and what they need, we really start thinking about that in terms of the 3 buckets. What are their informational needs? What's the sort of skill and awareness and understanding that they need? What are their peer support needs, the emotional needs, the connection needs that they have? Do they need to be connected with other family members, with other self-advocates, or maybe siblings, connected to other siblings? But we also can't forget about the 3rd bucket, the goods and service buckets. What are the day-to-day supports that they need? What are the financial supports that they might need? What are the caregiving supports that might be there? So we need to be thinking about that ring of supports. But we need to do all of this through the lens of what we call our integrated service and support star. Are we thinking about their personal assets? Are we thinking about the relationships, the technology that they can use to problem solve or plan with? Are we thinking about the places that they go that anybody can access in the community, as well as leveraging the more formal eligibility-based supports that are available? So what I just provided for you was just a basic overview of the key principles of the Charting the LifeCourse Framework. I hope that provides you a good understanding of how to get started as you're working on your journey towards having a good life. Do know there are lots of other tools and resources that can help you both dig deeper into the principles to guide your thinking, but also some very practical tools that you can use for problem solving. Check out our website at lifecoursetools.com to get this information.